Joining us now from Jerusalem is NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez. Raf, I want to start out, what else do we know about these CENTCOM strikes in Syria? Because this hasn't been something we've been hearing a ton about over the last year. And then in the last 2 weeks, we've heard multiple strikes. How concerned are not only U.S. officials, but Israeli, Middle Eastern officials about ISIS coming back in wake of this kind of power vacuum?
Yeah, power vacuum is exactly the right phrase, Christina. There is a lot of concern that ISIS will exploit the chaos following the collapse of the Assad regime and try to reassert itself after it was really put on the back foot by the international coalition led by the United States and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. This strike happened in eastern Syria in the province of Deir ez-Zor. Central Command is saying that they saw ISIS operatives moving weapons around on a truck, and they carried out the strike. What's interesting, Christina, is they are saying that this happened in an area that up until a couple of weeks ago had been controlled by the Assad regime and by their Russian allies. So that is a really good illustration of what you rightly called a power vacuum. A lot of concern about ISIS filling those ungoverned spaces. You have seen over the course of the Biden administration, even though it hasn't got a whole lot of attention, that there is a commitment to trying to make sure that ISIS does not resurge. There are roughly 1,000 U.S. service personnel in northeastern Syria. Right now, there's actually more than that. More have been cycled in. The question is, what is that going to look like, that deployment under the Trump administration? We know that Trump in his first term did try to pull those American forces out of Syria. He said Syria is blood and sand. He did not have a whole lot of interest in having American personnel in harm's way. And one of the big questions is, what will his policy look like once he takes office on January 20th? Christina.
All right, Raf, hang on just a second, because I want to introduce Aaron David Miller, who's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for the International Peace, and, of course, the former U.S. State Department Arab-Israeli negotiator. Aaron, I'm wondering, I want to get your take on Syria's new leadership. You know, we kind of saw this in Kabul, where this new group rolled in, made all these promises, and then didn't hold them up. But, you know, he's meeting with officials, he's wearing suits, he's saying all the right things. Is it possible that they could actually pull off a functional government, or is it just too soon to tell?
You know, it's a fascinating question. Thanks for having me. There's no precedent when Arab authoritarians are overthrown, whether it's Egypt or Tunisia or Libya or Yemen. It either leads to more repression on one hand or chaotic dysfunction and division, particularly in a country like Yemen or Libya or even in Iraq. It's going to be a very heavy lift. I mean, the central question is, can an Islamist movement that is highly decentralized with authoritarian tendencies govern a country that is multi-confessional, multi-ethnic, that has high expectations for a transparent, participatory form of government that benefits the Syrian people who have suffered so extraordinarily under 5 decades of rule of the Assad family? That's the question. I mean, at this stage, no pass, no A, no B, no C. I think it's an incomplete. And I think we're simply going to have to wait to see whether Ahmed Shara, who wants to be a kingmaker, a terribly ambitious individual, can shed those authoritarian and Islamist strict practices and adjust and adapt to what the Syrian public and the international community. Remember, he's still designated as, HTS is still designated as a foreign terrorist organization, and Syria probably the most heavily sanctioned country in the world after Russia and North Korea. So he's got to deliver, and he's got to at least walk the walk and talk the talk. We'll see if it lasts.
I did think it was interesting that after meeting with U.S. officials, they did take down al-Jawlani's rewards for justice, because, as you mentioned, this was designated a terrorist organization, but that page, when you go to click on it now, is no longer there. It's been taken down. Raf, I want to ask you, how is this all being viewed, not only in Israel, but by regional partners? Are they also suspicious? Are they hopeful? What are you hearing from people in your part of the world?
I think it's a wait-and-see approach, exactly as Aaron was saying. There is not a bright history of the replacements of these Middle Eastern dictators proving to be, liberal Democrats themselves. But we will wait and see. And Ahmed Shara is certainly, from the perspective of the United States, making the right noises, saying that he will not impinge on the rights of minorities, of women, that he does not intend Syria to be a threat to any of its neighbors, including Israel. Based on his ideological backgrounds, this is someone who is a Sunni Islamist. He was part of al-Qaeda. You can probably bet he's no fan of Israel. But he certainly is not making threats at this point, even given these intensive Israeli strikes we've seen over the last few weeks, the fact that Israel has sent forces to occupy that UN-designated buffer zone in between Israeli and Syrian positions on the Golan Heights, and then actually advanced further, taking strategic positions inside of Syria. Bigger picture, the fall of the Assad regime is the loss of a major link in the Iranian chain, its so-called Axis resistance. Syria was the absolutely key funnel point for Iranian weapons making their way to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And so we are seeing Iran's proxy groups weakened from Hamas to Hezbollah. The Assad regime collapsed. The Iranian government itself feeling very vulnerable after Israel destroyed a lot of their key air defenses around Tehran in strikes earlier this year. Interestingly, Christina, one of the proxy groups that is still defiant and apparently totally undeterred are the Houthis down in Yemen, who just in the last week have fired 2 ballistic missiles that broke through Israeli air defenses and actually struck targets inside of Tel Aviv. Christina.
Also trying to take credit for that accidental U.S. friendly fire incident with that downed fighter jet. Aaron, I want to ask you really quickly before we go. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that progress is being made in a ceasefire deal, which would, hopefully stop the conflict in Gaza and bring some of these hostages home. But we've heard this before. We've been hearing it for months. Do you think this time is any different?
I think it demonstrates that, in my experience, that Israeli-Palestinian negotiations really have only 2 speeds, slow and slower. I do believe that a deal now is more likely than we've seen over the course of the last year. One of the key stumbling blocks is, can Hamas come up with a list? Do they want to come up with a list of hostages who are living? Because the fewer there are, the less leverage Hamas is going to have in phase 2 of these negotiations. But I think it's reasonable to assume that by January 20, you can see a limited release. Women, maybe some men, the elderly, the infirm, in exchange for a badly needed 45 to 60-day ceasefire. Certainly for the hostages, their families, and for the people of Gaza, this will be an extraordinary moment and New Year.
All right. Rolf Sanchez, Aaron David Miller, thank you both very much.